right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Incus Q&A. I realized that I didn't do one of those in a little while, with most of the content lately in the live streams being focused on Incus OS. So figured it would be a good idea, especially because this is a bit of a heck of a week for me. I'm extremely busy preparing for NorthSec next week, that security conference I run every year. As well as dealing with construction and a whole bunch of other stuff. So didn't really get to prepare much more content on Incus OS other than just giving you a quick run through of what happened over the past week. And yeah, otherwise I welcome your questions. If I don't get enough questions, I'll probably just start rambling about what we're working on Incus and kind of what's coming. But that's gonna be today. All right. So first off, for anyone who's been following the previous live streams, just a quick update on Incus OS. Last week, you might remember that things have been a bit bumpy installing on actual hardware. So I did do a few demos of like installing in VMs with seed data and all that stuff. So that's been working pretty smoothly in VMs, but then it didn't work on my laptop. Now, just a bit of an update. I don't know how well you can see that behind me, but this laptop is now actually running Incus OS. And I've installed it a few times and it's working just fine. There were quite a few issues that we kind of went through. So let's just go take a look of what happened over the past week. You can see there's a lot of commits. So yeah, I fixed a few things. Matthias fixed a whole bunch of things. All right. Okay, so it says last week. How last week was last week? May 2nd. May 2nd was Friday, so we need May 1st actually for it to line up with the last stream. So it's still May 2nd. Start May 1st. Okay, so around there. Okay, so this was okay. Yeah, I think we're around there. So what kind of happened since that last stream? So the first thing, and I think it's this commit, fix install on bare metal. Yeah. Okay. So there were a couple of things that didn't work on my laptop, and I think I listed both of those in the notes last week. But basically, one thing was we did have USB mass storage support, but not UAS. UAS is USB attached SCSI, and you actually need that for your like to access a proper USB stick. So that being missing, that was a bit of a problem. That's why the system was not booting at all. The other issue was Secure Boot wasn't enrolling. So it would just boot, which was wrong because it should have showed the message being telling us Secure Boot enrollment, wait 15 seconds, apply it, reboot. That's because systemd boot, starting with, I don't remember exactly what version of systemd, stopped doing enrollment on physical machines unless it's forced. So that's what we can see here as this change. We're configuring the systemd boot bootloader config to force the secure boot enrollment. And with that, now physical machines behave like VMs. They will actually enroll the key, reboot, boot the installer. Now we can read the disk. So hey, you actually end up booting. There were a bunch more issues. It wasn't quite that simple, but that was really the main issue for why things weren't starting. This one was a small fix by Matthias so that you don't need to use a 50 gigs USB stick anymore. So that was good. That's now landed. That was another issue I had last week. I had to run and find a SSD that was like over 50 gigs large, so I could actually get the install going. That's no longer needed. I actually reinstalled this laptop yesterday using a normal USB stick. I think it was like 16 gigs large or something. Worked just fine. So we fixed that. That's just a GitHub thing, doesn't really matter. We temporarily turned on verbose boot to try and see what's going on. That then got turned off, as you can see. So there was like just a bit of, that was just a quick debugging run so that I could really get a properly signed image and validate it. Then we noticed the secure boot key was marked as 2024, so fixed that. It's now marked as, there's no year on it. We still need to do some work on actually how to do like have a secure root key that signs subkeys that actually signs the OS, so that we can provide those subkeys to GitHub or the platforms for signing, but still have a way to handle revocation and key rotation. So that's still something to look at. We've not had time to do that yet, but we've got a new secure boot key for this, so that's fine. The next piece was console output wasn't good. It didn't really work. So the system would install, but you wouldn't get anything on screen. So to fix that, basically what we needed to do was stop overriding the kernel command line. So that's what's here. We're no longer setting console.tty as 0. For anyone wondering, the dev console lands on the last console. So in this case, on the serial port, there was no serial port that was causing an issue. So we're just removing that entirely. And instead what we're doing is the text UI itself now makes missing devices non-fatal and always tries to write to the serial console. So if we do that, now we've got a pretty good chance that you can actually boot and get a proper console output. It also has the interesting side effect that now if you run it in a VM, you actually have a higher resolution text console. So that's pretty good because the resolution was pretty bad. All right, so with that, we were mostly able to boot on a machine and see what's going on. Then there were a few more problems. So let's go look at the rest of the list here. One small issue I noticed was that we're always downloading the full images, which is not needed, so I got rid of that. We tweaked the OS release file because at boot it would show booting Debian testing/sid, I think. Now it shows booting Incus OS, so slightly cleaner. We've tweaked the text output on the text UI so that it's just more compact effectively. I think I've got another issue actually open to try and add colors as well so that it's easier to understand what fields are what, but that's not there yet. Small tweak to the ISO image. We effectively were generating both a USB image and then an ISO image, but there were two different builds, meaning they could be just slightly different and cause some issues. So we've now changed things so that the USB build is the primary build, and then we repack it into an ISO instead of rebuilding it. So it's just a bit cleaner. I had one issue where if I was setting force install to flush a drive, it wasn't actually flushing the drive and would then cause a bunch of conflicts. So that's for that reason I had to literally boot servers like onto an Ubuntu environment or Debian environment and then wipe the disk and then run Incus OS install again. So we fixed that. The partition table cleaning that we used to have and got removed by accident is now back in there. Network, there was a bit of an issue too on that front. If you had a machine with multiple NICs and one or more NICs were not plugged in, were not functional, Incus OS would just wait indefinitely for all of them to be functional instead of succeeding on whichever one is the first. So we fixed that now. Now you just need one functional NIC for Incus OS to start, and then you can push a full network config with the correct stuff and get out of that. So that was really needed for servers that tend to have a bunch of network ports, some of which are just not connected. So fix that, tweak the UI a bit to better report the IP addresses, showing us what interface it's on. So that made things a bit easier to debug. Then some tweaks to actually get newer builds, rename release mode. So it's just like I did a couple of logging tweaks effectively to try to quiesce a bit the output on screen to something a bit simpler. Then, so that's why debug messages are now hidden. Some of the log messages were turned into debug messages. And also, yeah, did things like renaming release mode to production mode. One of the issues we had with the networking was that we were getting into a network loop. When you were getting into that situation, we kept trying to talk to GitHub, which was then very quickly hitting the GitHub rate limit and blocking us. You might remember in the last stream, I had to literally turn off one of my gateways to change my IP address to fix that. So now we handle rate limits, and the provider goes into unavailable mode as soon as it gets a rate limit error, which then means it effectively doesn't try to talk to GitHub for another 6 hours, at which point it will try again pulling an update, and that should work fine. Matthias then did a bit of work to add a logging API. So that's why we see adding persistency to the journal. And here, like this, a debugging endpoint that we can hit to download journal entries. So that's new too. And then we got into more complex networking. Like for networks, so my use case right now, which is both what we need for some customers and what I need for NorthSec, is dual 40 gig or dual 100 gig bonded together with a bunch of VLANs, and then one VLAN is used for the management of Incus OS, and all the VLANs, including the management one, must be available to instances through a bridge. So that's the setup we're trying to get to. We currently still have an issue with the VLAN part, but everything else has now been solved. So there's a bunch of commits kind of related to that. There was an issue just like updating the network config, so I fixed that. Just naming for some of the structs, I fixed that too. Tweaked some of the scripts for spawning the image. And then, yeah, lots of fixes for network config generation. This one is indeed a lot of fixes. So it adds a bunch of missing fields. It adds a whole bunch of different things to line up the behavior of what we really expect for interfaces, bonds, and VLANs. So that got landed yesterday, which then got my server mostly behaving. And then on top of that, I did a few more tweaks, mostly handling of interfaces without addresses. Our default behavior with systemd network day was to wait for interfaces to be routable. And an interface without an IP address will never be routable. So we've changed just a bit of logic to effectively handle this case. If you look at this, it's basically if there's an IP address, we enable link local IPv6. If there's no IP address at all, not only do we turn off link local IPv6, we also set a flag in networkd saying that this interface should be considered to be fully functional, configured, and everything, even if it doesn't have an IP address. So we've got that in place now. What did I do then? So that was to make networkd happy. And then there was another issue, which was that our own logic was going through every single interface and looking for it to be routable, which again will never happen on an interface with no IP addresses. So I did a bit of logic here on all three types to handle the case where some interfaces just don't have an IP address. So that fixed that. And the rest, there was a weird issue where if you are providing a pre-seed for Incus and then you would apply an update of Incus itself, it would accidentally kind of clobber the initialized flag, making it look like it was never initialized and triggering initialization again. If you had a pre-seed, initialization would then fail because it was already done, and that would get you into a loop with Incus OS kind of restarting in a loop, trying to initialize, and to never succeed. So that's fixed now. And I did check on that laptop that I can update to it, reboot, initialized flag, and everything remains in place, and we're all good. So that's where we're at. It's now at a spot where we can actually install on bare metal. I did it both on my laptop, on a server, and we're testing it on other servers now, different vendors and things. It works fine. There's still some more advanced networking, specifically VLANs, that need to get resolved. Matthias is working on that. Hopefully we're getting a pull request for that later today. But otherwise it's fine. And we've got the logging endpoint to try and see what's going on, what kind of slowdowns we might see on those machines. So that's we're getting into pretty good shape. Let's just see kind of what we have as far as issues. So I think the main gap, other than some bugs right now, is the Flasher tool. So like making it easy to actually generate a disk image on ISO that you can use to install this thing. And it's still, user experience wise, you need to be pretty careful, because if you don't put a trusted certificate through like in your pre-seed and you deploy on bare metal, there's literally no way for you to access it. So that's basically where we're at. I can just show you what's going on with the one I'm running for NorthSec. Maybe let me see if I can easily switch, like show that terminal. Here we go. And then I'll look at the questions. I just saw a whole bunch of stuff in the chat, so I'm looking forward to that. All right. So query MBS, so that's the remote for that remote server. And I can do OS 1.0. Here we go, we're running on the latest thing. We can see Incus is actually initialized. We can go look at system network, which shows one of those configs with a bond. I'm currently keeping one of the standalone interfaces just because I don't have that VLAN support yet. So I'm using this one as the management interface, and then the bond has everything else. Log, I didn't actually try it yet. Oh, it's debug/log. Okay, so that works. It gets us the journal the output as JSON. So we'll probably, like, once we have a command line tool, we'll clean that up a bit and make it look more like a journal output. But yeah, it is functional. We do have access to the log that way. What else do we have that's worth mentioning? Like encryption and stuff hasn't really changed in a little bit. The UI I mentioned, like the text UI got tweaked a bit. Do I actually have a recent one? I don't know. Let's try that Incus OS one. I have no idea how recent it is and whether it's broken or not. So I guess we'll see. Okay, so it's booting up. So it's at least somewhat recent if it has that boot menu thing. I just hope it's signed by the new key, because if it's not, it won't be able to update itself. Okay, it doesn't have network yet, that's fine. Now it does. Let's see. It's gonna be able to connect. No, so this is like, that's the bug where you have two interfaces, only one of which works. So that's why it's not working. Now, that's been fixed, but that's running a build from before the fix. So let me just stop it, and we'll just remove that secondary NIC and then start it back up, and that should fix that. Oh, in case you're wondering how to do a NIC that's plugged to nothing, that's how. All right, let's save that and start it back up. And hopefully there was nothing else wrong with that particular build, and it can auto-update. Let's see. Okay. Oh. Yeah, so now it's complaining about the network config, since it apparently has something in the seed about the device that no longer exists. That's good. Good thing is that it's a VM, so we can go do things. In this case, I'm gonna go and stop Incus OS, I guess. There we go. And wipe it state clean. So state goes bye-bye, and then we start this thing back up. Oh, yeah, now it's mad about the crypto stuff. Sweet. Yeah, kind of tempted to just redo that VM at this point. All right. Incus, delete this guy. I'm just gonna put a new image for you. That's gonna be easier. As I said, we fixed a lot of stuff. So there was a good reason to do all of the fixes. All right. No way I typed this thing correctly. I've been quite terrible at typing my password lately for that key. There we go. Oh, I'm actually up to date. Wow, so much for going through all that effort then. Spawn image. Okay, so we want, what's the current version? Let's see, Incus OS release. Okay, so that's the current version, and then let's call it Incus OS. There we go. So just downloading the image, and it's gonna go through the install for us. And while that's going on, I'm just gonna go look at the chat a bit. So really would appreciate is a rewrite version of the storage backend benchmarks. It's quite difficult to decide what's the best storage backends for which use case. Yeah, I need to actually look at that. We used to have daily benchmarks across LexD, and I think I've got those tests on Incus as well. It really depends on what you're running, basically. Oh yeah, there we go. You can see the new higher resolution stuff. Okay, let's just shrink it. There we go. All right, so yeah, on the storage side, it really depends. ZFS is kind of my go-to because it provides a lot of flexibility on like a per dataset config options. It also does a good job at both containers and VMs. It supports delegation. It supports a lot of pretty cool features. Now, it's not really an option on every single distro. So if it's not, then you kind of have to decide whether you care more about containers or about VMs. If you care more about containers, you're going to want to use BurFS probably at that point. If you care more about VMs, you probably want to use LVM. That's because putting raw device, like raw block devices on BurFS, no, it's not great. We need to mark it as no copy on write, but then when you do that, you can lose most of the nice features of BurFS. So yeah, ZFS is a pretty good middle ground on all fronts. It's not the most performant, but it's got all the features and works really well for both containers and VMs. If just containers, BurFS is fine. If just otherwise, consider probably LVM. LVM is not the best for containers. It's somewhat kind of not really resource intensive. It's actually pretty lightweight once it's done, but now you get like one file system per container instead of something that's shared. There's a bit of overhead and maintenance is slightly worse. So that's basically the state of storage. I mean, we kept always saying that like basically all storage options suck, and you just need to pick the one that sucks the least for your environment. We found that ZFS on average kind of sucks the least for us, which is why it's used in things like Incus OS. All right, let's see. So networking, come on. Why isn't it going through IPv6? Yeah, so there's a DNS federation weirdness here going on. Like wouldn't be a problem on a normal machine. My desktop happens to be IPv6 only, and for some reason it's trying to talk to GitHub over IPv4 only. So it's not gonna go any further than this, I don't think. No real idea why. It could be that it's actually resetting the network every time, and then it hits. Yeah, it's probably what's going on. The network is being reset, which temporarily clears the IPv6 route. So then it tries to go over IPv4, and IPv4 doesn't work. I mean, I can fix that easily enough by temporarily putting back some IPv4 on this machine. I think I did that recently. So if I add an IPv4 address and then just add, come on, add the default gateway, then that should work better, probably. It's definitely slower. Come on, refresh. Okay. It should be able to actually reach GitHub this time around, unless there's some NAT stuff going on, because maybe we can check. I don't remember what commands I've got in that VM. Yeah, timeout. Okay. Let me restart. I should actually restart Incus. I've got a weird setup. Like not only do I do IPv6 only by default, but my IPv4 subnet is not NATed and uses BGP. So chances are it's just a BGP issue. Since I didn't have IPv4, Incus never saw the need to advertise any of that stuff. And that would lead to VMs not having actual IPv6 connectivity. Let me see if I've got another VM I can use for testing, like kernel test here. Oh, agent not running. Okay, lovely. Let's restart this guy. I mean, I could probably use U1, whatever that container is. Let's see, does it have connectivity? No, it doesn't. Okay, well, that's the problem. Fine, let's just temporarily fix that with IPv4 NAT. So basically turning it into a normal network like basically everyone else uses. Hey, look at that. That pings. Now if I look at Incus OS. Okay. Now it should actually have connectivity. Hey, there we go. Okay, so there's still a small glitch with IPv6 only. I'm gonna just keep a note that we need to look at that. Most likely, so it's not really a problem normally, because if you pushed an actual network config, you could tell it that you want IPv6 connectivity and that you don't have IPv4, in which case it's gonna actually wait for IPv6 to work. In this environment, it doesn't, because we didn't provide any seed. And so it tries very hard to get, well, it assumes as soon as you get IPv4, you're fine. And in this case, IPv4 is meaningless, you need IPv6. So we can probably fix that with just a small delay in the provider, or have the provider retry a limited number of times. I don't want to get into a big loop. Otherwise, we're going to hit GitHub timeouts and stuff, GitHub rate limits and stuff. But they should at least probably retry the connection like 2 or 3 times to just get past that initial IPv6 bring up issue. All right, so just make a note of that. Anyway, that's Incus OS running. You can see it's a bit less verbose these days. We can see even that even more if we restart it. So if we do Incus restart, Incus OS. Okay, it's rebooting. So on a clean boot, yeah. on a clean boot where there is no need to download anything, it's not gonna log very much, which is kind of what we wanted. Wanted to keep things pretty simple. So yeah, system is starting up, mode is production, starting up Incus, system is ready. There we go. So that's a normal system that boots, that just runs. So that's all good. Now let's check what else were the questions. So on the storage side, I think I ranted a bit on that. Got a few mini PC servers, but they have only one network interface. Will it work with Incus OS? Yes, it will actually work better than if you've got more than one of them. At least that was the issue we ran into over the past week. Yeah, single network interface is not a problem. Incus OS will effectively, behind the scenes, create a bridge for every single one of those interfaces. I can actually show you that real quick, because it's not something that's obvious, but it's something that's really nice. Because if you've ever looked at our forum, people keep trying to figure out how to put containers and VMs on their physical network. And it's always like, oh, you need to go configure your OS. The instructions depend on your OS. Well, this time we're the OS, so we don't really have that problem anymore. And what you can see here is the interface itself is named ENP5S0. So what we do is we play a bit of game of reshuffle. So we renamed ENP5S0 to EN and then the MAC address. So this is the actual original NIC. And then we created a NIC called ENP5S0, effectively replacing it, which is a bridge that includes this device. And that means that from the Incus's point of view, you can super easily just launch a container on that network and it just works, or a VM on that network and it just works. So I should be able to basically do images, Debian 13, network ENP5S0. And that should just give us, there we go, simple joy, and there we go. It's running on the same network. And if we also have all of the VLAN features enabled. So if you've got VLANs on your physical network, it's as simple as then setting the VLAN IDs that you want in the Incus config, and you're good. So yeah, this is really works quite nicely. Obviously, if you've got multiple network ports, then you can do more things. You can do bonding for like more of a failover, like high reliability, higher bandwidth environment. But yeah, single NIC is perfectly fine. And Jared was checking that they had TPMs. Yeah, that's a pretty hard requirement. We basically need UEFI, secure boot, and TPMs. We've actually added some checks now that if you boot Incus OS on a system without a TPM, you're gonna get a nasty error. And we're gonna start doing the same thing for some of the other secure boot bits and whatnot. Basically just making sure everything is nice and clean. There's a question from Matt around the TPMs. So I did get one TPM so far that I'm using in that server for NorthSec. It works great. It was like $20, well, $20 Canadian, so like probably $15 or something US. on Amazon, and it's actually branded Supermicro, works just great in that machine. So I'm probably gonna place a larger order of probably like a dozen or so of them to put in my other Supermicro server so that I don't have that problem again, and they all have a working TPM2 chip in the future. So it's actually a pretty low cost fix for any machine that doesn't support it. If you've got a TPM header on the board, and looks like basically all motherboards that don't have a TPM built in tend to have the header, then it's a pretty simple pretty simple fix. The chip doesn't cost much. Amazon and others seem to have it in stock usually, and shows up quickly. Just plug it in, you're done. Wondering about my thoughts on supporting gvisor or Firecracker within Incus. Is that feasible? How realistic? Well, maybe, basically. So I mean, both of them, so they're a bit of a different beast, right? gvisor is not really virtualization. It's like system call in user space emulation of a Linux system. So it's very safe. It's a very safe way to run, especially things like container workloads or slightly less trusted in containers, because you don't really run anything on a kernel. It could work as effectively a container runtime of sorts. That would still be quite a bit of work to do all of the plumbing to make that behave. Firecracker is a bit of a different beast. It's really meant for Lambda type VMs, like extremely short-lived VMs. Firecracker is effectively based on Rust VMM, so it's using virtualization, but for extremely short-lived, lightweight VMs. That one I'm not so sure about, because for Lambda, you also usually want a very, very quick way to handle storage, network, and all that stuff. Like you want to have a VM be spawned, do its stuff, exit within, a second or two. And while we could do it on the VM side by calling something like Firecracker, our general infrastructure around storage and network and all that stuff would probably take significantly longer to set up and tear down than the lifespan of the VM. So that's a bit of a weirder one. Currently, I mean, I think both of those tend to be used to an extent by folks who want containers but safer, especially for OCI containers. So the issue we have open on GitHub and our initial focus is going to be allowing OCI containers to be run inside of VMs. So effectively doing Incus launch, Docker, colon, whatever image you want, --VM. And that will run into a very lightweight VM, not unlike what Firecracker kind of does behind the scenes as far as the storage and a bunch of other things. And then run the container in there for those who are in an environment where you don't want to run containers, basically. So that's something we're actively looking at. I think once we'll have that one, it's going to be a matter of checking how much of a gap do we still have, like how many people actually want something like Firecracker or gvisor, and then kind of balancing that compared to the effort to add it and then maintain it. Because running OCI images inside of a VM, that's pretty lightweight for us. Like we already have QEMU, and just like OCI on containers is effectively like a 50 lines of code type workaround, where we just take a slightly different path in LXC to run that. The VM case is going to be more complex, but not by a lot. It's basically going to be, okay, well, images OCI, you ask to run it with QEMU, cool, well, as a VM, and then we don't have a valid disk image, we don't have a block device for that. But what we will have is effectively like a UKI, so like a unified kernel image that we can start in QEMU, which will then mount VirtuaUFS, access the containers root file system that way, and then effectively just run that one workload. Very similar to like a bunch of the other approaches. Like I think some of the Firecracker stuff does that, Kata does that. It's not a particularly new concept. It's just like, what do we need to do to support that pretty easily in Incus? And yeah, that's the plan for that one. It's been open for a little while. I don't know when I'll get to that. As mentioned, I've been kind of busy lately. So I'm hoping for this year. I'm hoping that by the end of 2025, we will have kind of the rule set with like system containers, application containers, VMs, and OCI VMs. so that you can kind of pick what you want. And then if we see a very strong need for extremely lightweight VMs, like to run Lambda type stuff, then we'll look into that from that point on, I think. All right, I think that's enough on that one. How are the students doing? And maybe related, do you have any thought about LLMs writing Go code? Well, I mean, Jared knows my opinion on that one, but yes. So we did get a bunch of students pull requests. Actually merged a lot already, and I'm reviewing more. That's part of why I'm so busy right now, is I'm also reviewing all that stuff. And some of it is great quality, some of it not so much. Some of it I just fix myself in place. Oh, we've got a random failure here. Just gonna fix that. Some of it I can just fix myself in place and that's fine. Some of it is like, nah, sorry, you need to do it differently and, go back and work on it. So we currently have 12 open, and what do we have? So these two are blocked. This one is work in progress. That's a student, that's a student, that's a student. This is student 2, I think. That as well, this one too, this one too, this one too. So yeah, we've got currently probably like a dozen per request or something. Well, it's a dozen total, so we've got 9 of those that are from students right now. And yeah, I merged a lot more of those over the past few days. I try to do 3 or 4 something every day. Sometimes takes longer and I don't get to that, but that's the general goal. So yeah, making good progress, and we didn't have any LLM type issue with those as far as I know. We did get a couple of weird pull requests recently that felt a lot like someone asked an LLM to go and fix random issues on GitHub, because the few pull requests we got were had basically nothing in common other than them fixing Incus bugs. And the approach was quite weird, and what was included was also quite weird. So I closed it pretty much immediately, being like, hey, sign off is not there. You include a bunch of random files. You probably want to go look at it again. And again, I'm not sure if it was an LLM or not, but that's kind of what got us talking within the maintainers. We all have about pretty similar opinions of LLMs right now, which is that we hate them with passion. I tend to, the only times I've used LLMs is when I need them to do what they're good at, which is come up with random bullshit. So if I need to come up with completely random stuff, that's fine. Like completely random but plausible sounding stuff, effectively. I've used LLMs for that. That's fine. For anything complex, yeah, not so much. Again, that's effectively what we ended up putting in the contributing guide. We want code to generally come from humans. There's some exceptions for standard scripts formatters, like if you run seds to fix a pattern and that kind of stuff. Sure, fine, that's fine. But any tools you use needs to be reproducible. You need to be able to understand why the tool came up with that conclusion. You can't just run a tool that will give you a completely different thing every time you run it. That doesn't work. And we effectively expect every single contributors to be able to explain why they took a given approach, why their code works that way, what's going on. You can't really reason with code that came from an LLM if the person doesn't fully understand what that code does and why. So if someone uses an LLM behind the scenes to brainstorm and they get to something they actually fully understand and that makes sense to them that they can defend, we probably won't be able to tell, and we probably won't care at that point. But yeah, there's been a bunch of discussions around what happened to the curl project and others, where they keep getting security reports and pull requests and stuff trying to fix security issues that are completely made up. Those security bugs don't exist. The fixes introduce bugs, and it's just costing the maintainers an insane amount of time to deal with all of that crap. So yeah, our opinion is pretty strong on we don't want to see any of that stuff for now. Maybe at some point it will become some specific tools will kind of get ahead of the rest and will actually be useful in specific scenarios, and we can relax things a bit. As it stands, yeah, no, we just don't want to see any of it. So That's for the LLM thing. All right, what else do we have in there? Okay, the turning off the router last week. Yeah, any plans to add clustered storage solutions like Ceph in the base image of Incus OS? No. Basically, the answer is no. So what we do support in the base OS is effectively NVMe, iSCSI, and LVM. So if you want to connect to an external storage array, that's in the base because that kind of needs to be in the base. For the Ceph client, we will probably add it at some point as part of the Incus image itself, so as like the application for Incus. And we might do linstore will be a bit trickier because the RBD needs to be kernel level, so that needs to be in the base. But maybe we'll put the DRBD modules in the base and then the linstore satellite code in the Incus layer instead. So that's kind of the goal there. And you like obviously you might have noticed that I mentioned kind of the client in both cases. If you want to actually expose physical disks that you have, if you want to run the linstore controller, if you want to run the Ceph monitors, managers, MDS, all those kind of things, you don't want to run those on bare metal. They need to run as containers. Our goal is to have an internal project that Incus OS itself can maintain and like spawn services and stuff for you within that internal project. And that would be how Incus OS might in time be able to run a Ceph cluster by spawning the Ceph clustered services on there. Same thing for install, same thing for also authentication authorization, like a reverse proxy for HTTP stuff, all that kind of stuff. So that's the goal. We definitely want to go in that direction. There are a few blockers along the way that we've been looking at here and there. But that's the goal. So like the base OS, we basically just want to keep as simple as possible. One of the things we quite like with the base OS right now is it doesn't even include Python. So it's like we're really trying to keep it as small as possible to limit attack surface, limit how often you need to reboot it. The application layer, so in this case Incus, we're a bit more flexible. It's easier to restart it. We know that once we pull Ceph in there, that will pull Python in that layer. It's fine. It's very lightweight, very easy to update. And probably the same is going to happen then down the line with linstore. So that's basically the plan for clustered storage. And the same is also true for clustered networking. We support OVS and Event Controller in the base image, but that doesn't run the Event Control plane. If you want the Event Control plane, we're gonna want to run that as containers, or probably OCI containers within the internal project. And that also means that within a cluster, then if you evacuate specific machines, those services can be reshuffled, they keep the same IP addresses, and everything works fine. Whereas right now, if you run them bare metal, like we used to do with Incus deploy in some other environments, or even like, what MicroK8s, MicroCeph, MicroLex, and MicroOven do on the legacy side, you end up with some machines that are special snowflakes. You've got a few machines that are running the control plane for Oven, a few machines are running the control plane for Ceph. And if those machines go down, like if a majority of those machines go down, then you're left with nothing. Whereas if those services are running on top of the Incus cluster, we can do the automatic healing where those get kind of restarted somewhere else. Or we can even just like spawn new instances. We've got more options. And on clean evacuations for updates, those services can very easily be migrated to other machines and started back. So that's the idea for this aspect of things. All right, there's a question around any news regarding Feature Fusion Operations Center. I assume this will be a modern UI for Incus, something that will replace LXC console or native Incus UI console. Yes and no. It's really designed. So Operations Center that Feature Fusion is currently developing, and that's still not released on GitHub, but we're getting pretty close. Its goal is to give you a central inventory of everything you're doing. So the idea is that if you're running dozens of clusters, you probably want something that keeps track of what instance is running on what cluster. That's what Operations Center gives you. It also gives you centralized provisioning. So you can deploy a bunch of machines with Incus OS, point them in the seed to Operations Center. They will then appear in Operations Center and you can deploy them and cluster them together from there. We will support, probably eventually, not at the beginning, people logging into Operation Center, even if they're not full admin, so that they can see their own instances and where they're running. One thing we don't intend to put in Operation Center is any ability for it to directly modify anything that's running on the clusters. That's just a security design, effectively. We don't want a compromised Operation Center to potentially compromise hundreds of Incus clusters. So to avoid that, it effectively has read-only access to the clusters. And once you've found the item you'd like to access or modify, it will have a link to that specific item on that specific cluster, which will typically be, currently the Incus UI, which is the rebranded LexD UI. We probably will be coming up with a new Incus UI at some point. That's one thing that Future Fusion has a decent chance of being able to fund in the near future. Like, we're gonna need to do some more web development on Operation Center, Migration Manager, and a bunch of other things. So at that point, we'll have a web development team that we could put on coming up with a better UI for Incus itself. The one coming from NextD is not bad. We've done a bunch of improvements, and it works pretty well. But it's also not as native, and I think some of the focus of it is kind of off. Like, we're looking more towards cluster these days. We're looking more at like different kind of level, like different users interacting with it, that kind of stuff, which it wasn't really designed for initially. And like some areas, like especially networking, is pretty light in support in Incus in the Incus UI. So it's the kind of thing where, like, if we do a new UI, that will probably get to improve. All right, so that's basically just what Operation Center and Incus UI and how that all fits together. Then we've got, what's your TrueNAS recommendation in terms of stability, security, to either run an Incus server on TrueNAS or run a virtualized TrueNAS instance on an Incus server? I'm not a TrueNAS user myself, so I'm probably not the best to answer that necessarily. It's definitely, we had some questions before of like, hey, should I just wait for Incus OS and then use that instead of TrueNAS? And the answer was, depends what you need. If you only need is to run VMs and containers, then yeah, Incus OS will be better. If you actually want a NAS, as in you need to be able to manage a bunch of drives, replication, backups, snapshots, exposing shares to Windows machines, Linux machines, all kind of stuff, then you really need TrueNAS or something like it. So it kind of depends on your focus. If the main purpose of the machine you're dealing with is storage, if it's filled of different kind of drives, if it's got fast connectivity, if it's mostly designed for fast access, like, you're doing video editing or something resource intensive, then it probably makes sense to run that on bare metal and avoid a bunch of the overhead, and then run the few containers and VMs you have through its Incus integration. Now, if you're in the other way around, where like you're running mostly VMs and containers, or you're looking at running like a cluster of Incus servers or something like that, and you happen to also need to share some storage with Windows Linux clients and that kind of stuff, then it probably makes sense to run TrueNAS as a VM on top of Incus instead. So it really depends on the main focus of the environment. Okay, so there was a question about. Okay, I think something else, a follow-up on the storage side. So that's the problem, is that I want to use both, as in containers and VMs. And ZFS is not always an option. Also distributed systems. So yeah, so in the distributed case, obviously, ZFS is not really an option anymore. At which point you end up looking at Ceph or Linstore. And the difference there is, it's mostly on the reliability front. If you need to do like complex replication cross-site, that kind of thing, if you need file systems and object storage and all of that kind of stuff, you're probably going to want to use Ceph, but you need to know that the IO latency won't be great, so your performance won't be amazing. Basically, if you're doing only streaming of large files, it will be perfectly fine. But if you're dealing with a lot of small files, like most systems do, performance won't be amazing. Linstore kind of fixes that by having generally quite good performance like not quite local, but pretty close to it. The main downside with Linstore is that it doesn't provide native uh, object storage or file systems. So in the case of Linstore, you're looking, if you need files to run, like shared file systems, if you need to run object storage, you're gonna find yourself having to effectively run that inside of a VM or container on top of your Linstore storage. And that comes with like a bit less high availability than Ceph in that regard, and a bit more maintenance burden on you. So it's again like a it depends type answer, but for most folks, I think the current sweet spot is basically if you can, which again you mentioned that maybe you won't be able to. Linstore supports ZFS, so what I would do is create like a Z pool directly on the machines, carve out part of that for local storage, give the rest to Linstore, and then you effectively have the best of both worlds with ZFS local for very fast, but not not shared, not particularly reliable disks, and then Linstore itself running on top of ZFS for like the shared cluster-wide storage. That's what I'm looking at switching a bunch of my clusters to. But like in my case, I also want to move them to Incus OS, so it's a bit of a chicken and egg. Well, it's gonna take a little while before I can actually move things, but yeah, it's but basically getting there. So yeah, it's really it depends. I mean, what I would probably recommend for anyone who really doesn't know what's a good fit for their situation, asking on the forum is not a bad idea. If you say, describe your environment, like is it single server, is it cluster, are you running VMs, containers, do you need like object storage, do you need file systems, do you need it to be shared storage? If you provide some of those details, then it should be reasonably easy from the situation to figure out what's your best bet. And then, try and test it in a lab or in VMs and see how it behaves for you. All right, comment around the architecture of Incus OS. Yeah. Okay, so it was like mostly commenting on I think the general design of Incus OS that it's basically locked down, we load specific applications, specific extra tools on top of it. Okay, there's a question, can we pin the VMs to a particular CPU regarding application license, CPU use case, Oracle, and the like? Yeah, so you can do that. You can either just, the default is you effectively set the number of CPUs you want and you're good. That usually cannot be detected by the guest. So if your licenses are tied to the number of cores, which is usually the case for things like Windows VMs and whatnot, it's fine. Oracle is a bit weirder because they can count the number of physical CPU cores you have and license you based on that, kind of regardless of what you pass to the guest. But yeah, you can either do the give me X number of virtual CPUs and Incus will do it for you, or you can pin being like, okay, I'm gonna use CPU ID 0 through 8 and it's gonna be pinned exactly on those CPU cores and threads. So yeah, you can definitely do that. It's a lot more work because you need to make sure that your pinning is right for every single VM. Otherwise, you might have servers where like half your CPU is basically unused. But yeah, we can definitely do that. So there was a question on the forum. Well, someone's reposting a question from the forum, effectively, Cody over there. Is there a cluster model for Incus for voting / API only cluster members? So you're meaning servers that don't actually have any instances on them? Yeah, there's a config option for that, actually. If we go look at, where is that? Incus clustering. It's in one of those. So those are the roles, member configuration. I think it's on that one. Yeah, so there's a config key here called scheduler.instance, which has 3 different values, and the default is all. So it means it will take any workload. So if you just do launch, and it might just get targeted there. You can do group, which means the machine will only take on workloads if its group is directly targeted. So that's like you do -- target at and the group name. Or you've got manual, and manual is basically what you want. If you set it to manual, the server will never take on any instance on its own. The only instances that might show up on it is if you do -- target and then that machine. So it's reasonably, and actually I just read the next message. I was gonna say the exact same thing. So it's reasonably common for cases where you have 2 sites or 2 physical file domains, but you need 3 for HA. So then what you do is that you create a third one, which could be like on a random colo site, VPN, whatever. You just need to have good latency and you're basically fine. So you create like you've got a third system that will never run instances, but that is part of the cluster just as a way to provide a third zone so that there is no risk of one zone falling over and taking 2 of the voters at the same time and taking down your entire cluster. So yeah, that's in the, I think at least on the VMware side, they call that a witness site. And we can effectively do it that way by having machines in the cluster that have that flag set so that they don't actually take on any instance. And we've got some amount of workarounds for how to deal with storage and networking. Because storage and networking must be consistent across an Incus cluster. But on the storage side, you can have it be backed by loop disks. So you might have servers with terabytes of storage, and you might have servers with like 1 gig of storage. And the 1 gig is obviously the server that will never run anything, so it still has the storage pool, just a tiny version of it that's super slow, doesn't matter. On the network side, we're adding support, at least on the physical network side, for network which one is it? Parent equals known, so that a physical NIC can be set as parent equals known, meaning this physical server doesn't have that NIC at all, but the network still needs to exist. So that takes care of that aspect. That's actually one of the pull requests that are currently open on Incus itself by one of the student groups at the University of Texas. Which one is it? Yeah, parent equals none for physical networks. So that's to kind of handle some of the consequences of effectively having a witness site. All right. Are you thinking of doing another video on NorthSec? I think I did one last year. Yeah, possibly. Definitely not before the event because yeah, I'm going to my hotel room in Montreal on Sunday, so that's not gonna happen. But afterwards, I might to just show kind of what it looks like, number of challenges we've been running, what the infra looks like. I don't actually know how many containers and stuff we're running this year. I think in my head I'm saying 84 is something I've seen, but maybe that was wrong. Anyway, we've got a bunch of containers per teams, and this year we're provisioning for a total of 96 teams. So that's still a pretty solid number. I think usually our average was closer to the 50-ish range containers. So that would be just shy of 5,000 or so containers in this case. If that 84 that I've got in my head for some reason is correct, then we're going to be closer to 8,000 containers total. And then each team effectively has 2 VMs, one that runs kind of all of those containers nested. And in this case, we do have a Windows challenge. So there's a second VM that's just to run Windows. So that's kind of what that looks like. The on-site side of things is also what I'm currently working on. So that's where Incus OS will be used. The data center is still running Incus deployed with Ansible on top of old Ubuntu 22.04, I think. The on-site experience I'm currently redeploying as Incus OS. So that's gonna be the first place where we have it actually in production for a week and see how that behaves. And the plan is for over the next year to actually do a bunch of work on the data center infrastructure. So we want to get from Ubuntu 22.04 Incus install sur packages on there with a big NVMe backed Ceph cluster to ideally Incus OS on all of the physical servers, storage on Linstore instead. And then all of the services and stuff that we have, they're currently a mix of Ubuntu 20.04 and 22.04, I think. We might have a couple of 24.04s all of those will move to Debian 13 once Trixie releases in probably a month or two at this point. So that's kind of the idea. So there's going to be a bunch of work. Also, currently, I'm using Ansible to deploy all the services, but the infrastructure itself was created by hand. And all of that stuff we're going to be moving over to Terraform. So I've done a bunch more Terraform stuff for my own infrastructure, for Future Fusion's infrastructure. All that stuff is using the Terraform provider. So I want NorthSec to also transition to that so that basically everything we have is all in Git. So that's the idea. It's actually one thing that's different this year on the NorthSec front compared to previous years. In the past, our staff, and we've got close to 100 staff members, they would create their challenges by directly going to Incus, creating containers and deploying by hand. This year, we didn't let them do that. This year, the only way they could was through a shared repo and a mix of Terraform and Ansible. So every single challenge this year was deployed through the Terraform provider for Incus and through the Ansible Incus connection plugin. That's a massive improvement for my team who runs infrastructure, because when you're deploying a CTF with security relevant challenges, we never know if we should be applying security updates or not. Some of the challenges might require a broken old version of a piece of software, and we never know. So now we don't have a problem anymore, because we can literally wipe the entire thing clean and redeploy it in about an hour and a half, giving us a clean slate that matches what was tested. And anything that needs to be old will be old, and everything else will have been automatically updated. So that was a massive improvement this year, and yeah, that should make things even smoother in the future. So we want to kind of standardize on that, make sure that everything we do at NorthSec is using Terraform, Ansible, and yeah, that we've got a great environment there. That actually reminds me that we're getting pretty close to the 1.0 version of the Terraform provider for Incus. We've got very few things left. So there's a pull request open right now for address sets. But if we go look at the milestone for 1.0, yeah, we effectively only have 3 things to sort out. So a couple of easy ones. So address set has been sorted out, it's just in review effectively. Image alias, that should be a pretty easy one to handle too. And then there's kind of reworking the way remotes are handled to just tidy that up. And then we'll be ready. We can tag a 1.0 of this thing. So that will be pretty exciting, just as far as, hey, we're not going to break you anymore. Because currently we've done a bunch of breakages. We've been renaming things, we've been refactoring things. It's been a bit of a bumpy ride for anyone using it. But with 1.0, we should be at a stage where we're happy with the general structure and quality. And from that point on, we can add new features, but we don't intend to actually break anything until 2.0. So there's a, did you have to change anything on the Incus side to get to 1.0 of the tofu provider? Not really. We didn't really do any changes to Incus itself. I think we added a few small features here and there to make things slightly nicer. It definitely found a bunch of bugs. Terraform is really good at poking all your APIs at the exact same time and finding a bunch of race conditions and missing locks. So we fixed a bunch of those. And we see that particularly with something like NorthSec, which is deploying dozens of containers across many, many projects all at the same time. We had some risk conditions on the Terraform side, especially during destroy, that we ended up fixing. And yeah, those are very welcome fixes. And as more and more folks start using Terraform to drive Incus, I'm sure we're gonna find more edge cases and things that we can then somewhat like that we can kind of reproduce, because a lot of those are extremely annoying bugs. You know, it's basically, hey, yeah, if you throw like 50 containers at this thing at the same time, 1 in 10 times maybe it will fail. And from our point of view, like unless we get lucky and the error tells us exactly what's wrong, it's near impossible to reproduce those kind of things. With Terraform, if someone is like, hey, I'm running on a machine with those kind of specs and I'm running this Terraform and this is hitting the bug maybe like half the time or something, we can pretty easily run that in a loop and like, you know, run it 50 times, 100 times, whatever. Make it fail, add more debugging, sort it out, run the loop again, make sure it's all clear, and then we're good. And yeah, for that's been very, very useful. All right. I think that's definitely everything in the chat. I'm just rechecking if there's anything I missed. All right. Yeah, no, I think I covered everything in the chat. So yeah, that's basically where we stand. Incus OS is mostly usable. You need to be careful about how you use it exactly, how to set it up. Once we have the flashing tool, it's going to be a lot easier because it will actually ask you all the relevant questions to get something that will actually function. But it's otherwise looking pretty good. Incus, a lot of changes are being reviewed and merged. It's great to see so many people contribute. I was actually looking at the stats for like how many people contributed, how many individual people contributed since the Incus 6.0 release about a year ago, and it's like 413 or something people. It was like upwards of 400, which is really, really good to see. I don't think we've ever seen that on the LexD side actually. So adoption is great. I don't usually share like very detailed metrics for for a user base because it's like comparing it day to day is kind of useful, but we know that the way we count, which is basically based on images downloaded from our image servers, it both overcounts some people who change IP addresses pretty often, and it undercounts anyone who's like behind NAT or using a corporate proxy or something like that. So the raw numbers are not that useful, but it's useful to see the kind of growth we're looking at. And you know, for well over a year, we've been looking at over 10% growth month to month. Actually, most of the year we were looking at like 15% growth month to month. Now with the TrueNAS stuff showing up, we've obviously gone way above that, and we're actually looking at currently 30% monthly growth, I think, something like that. And we're looking at adding close to 2,000 users a day or something like that. It's pretty mind-boggling what's going on, and we know it's gonna be tapering off. Like obviously at some point everyone who cares about running containers and VMs on TrueNAS will have tried it, and that's gonna slow down that growth until someone else kind of decides to adopt Incus en masse. So we'll see what that looks like. I'm looking forward to the release of Debian 13 because currently Debian is the most popular operating systems to run Incus on. That actually overtook Ubuntu a few months ago. So that's been pretty interesting to see. And that's considering that currently the only way we can install Incus on stable Debian is through backports. So once Debian 13 releases, with both Incus readily available and the deprecation warning for LexD, because Trixie, so Debian 13, will be the last release shipping LexD. We might see another kind of spike at that point and more adoption of Incus. And that's kind of ignoring the other big elephant in the room, which is the corporate side of things, like the work that I'm doing through Future Fusion, where we're dealing with environments that are running hundreds of thousands of VMs, typically on VMware, that are running clusters of thousands of servers. And so those kind of projects are absolutely massive as far as Incus adoption, because like basically overnight you can add hundreds of servers, if not thousands. Those will never count because they're all typically in an air-gapped environment, typically behind NATs, typically like if you can get out of those machines, it's through like a central proxy and it's going to count you as like one IP address at most. They also are unlikely to run our public images. It's all going to be repacked images, validated images on site, all that kind of stuff. So those environments we don't see. Like we know that there are like small public cloud providers and those kind of platforms that use Incus. Those don't count. We don't see them in those stats at all. But we know they exist. We see some contributions from some of those guys, and it's very, very exciting to see just how widely Incus is used these days. I don't think we've ever seen that with LexD, so it's really good to see that, our bet that the biggest issue effectively was having a proper community project that everyone can feel like they're involved in it, can contribute, and sure, everyone's got their agenda, but there's not one company kind of holding everyone with like, this is the direction, we don't care about anything else. Like, I'm doing most of the work on Incus as far as maintaining it, so I do have probably a fair amount of like, power, impact, whatever you call it, as far as the direction of the project. But I'm not the only maintainer. We're a group of like 5 or 6 maintainers, something or not. Things like the LLM change that was discussed internally, like with the various maintainers. We want to make sure we're on alignment. Only thing that's kind of major as far as project direction, it's never coming out of just one of us. It's always a group discussion. We always seek input, and yeah, I think that's how you're supposed to run an open source project. And we want to keep Incus, as a very good example for how to do that. All right, I think it's a pretty good place to leave it. It's been a bit of an hour, answered quite a few questions. Hopefully, got to show you another update on Incus OS and where we stand. And now I need to go and redeploy the on-site infrastructure of NorthSec on that actual Incus OS server so that I can then go and test 20 something switches and close to 100 wireless access points. So that's what I need to do before I can shove everything back into boxes and start packing for next week. So there we go. No guarantees on having any kind of content next week. It's actually pretty likely that there won't be, because I don't think I've got time to pre-record anything tomorrow. And then there's no way in hell I'm gonna be doing like I'm gonna find a good quiet spot with good microphone and everything to do anything next week. So most likely we'll skip a week, and then I'll see you the week after that, which should be an Incus release week, I think. Let me just check. So not next week. No, actually, there will be 1 week before an Incus release week. So you're probably gonna get an Incus OS stream, and then the week after that will be a normal Incus release. All right. Thanks a ton for watching this. If you've got any questions, you can leave it on YouTube. You can go on the community forum. You can go on GitHub. And yeah, thanks a ton for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.